All right, welcome back. This is the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and I've said this just about every time I do a show. I'm always excited because I've had some amazing guests, and I have one today. And really, what's the most fun for me is just diving in and learning their stories and learning about them and how that can motivate and inspire. There's so much to learn from some of these amazing guests that I've had, and today. Chris Hetherington, and I'm so excited. He's an 11-year NFL player, played for 5 or 6 different organizations. He is currently the CEO of a magnificent company called Fathead, which my kids all grew up with Fatheads on their wall, these big oversized pictures on their wall, these big stickers. But thank you, man. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming into the show.
Mark, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me.
So tell me a little bit about this one, because I always like to go back a little bit. And you're a young guy growing up, small town in Connecticut, and probably like a lot of us, playing a bunch of sports growing up. But eventually, you went to Yale and had a great career at Yale as a student and as an athlete. But eventually, made it into the NFL as an undrafted player. And so, looking back on that, kind of where did that kind of grit and toughness and the dreams and all that start for you, and who kind of instilled that in you?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I've had a kind of an unconventional path to where I am today. I mean, I grew up in a little small town in Connecticut called North Branford. My dad was a hard worker. He was a salesman, and he owned a little driving range on the side. So I grew up with a little driving range rat, banging balls and working there and having fun. But I played sports, played every sport as a kid. I love sports. And so whether it was basketball, football, baseball, hockey, soccer, played everything as a kid. I love being out there. I love competing. And I would say, once I got to high school, I went to this little prep school called Avon Old Farms in Avon, Connecticut. It was a hockey factory. I mean, we had it was a great institutional, academics and athletics were phenomenal, but I went in as a hockey player and ended up playing football, hockey, and baseball in high school. And then I came out and decided to go to Yale and play football and baseball and give up hockey. So I went to Yale because I wanted to get a great education. I grew up playing Yale youth hockey as a kid. My brother went to Princeton. He's 10 years older, played football at Princeton. And it was a dream for me to go to Yale. And so I went to Yale, really loved my time there. Really professional sports, I think for me, became a reality or a possibility. I would say my junior year at Yale. I came into Yale as a running back, defensive back, and they moved me to quarterback my freshman year. So I never played quarterback in my life. So I played all 4 years at quarterback, came out in the draft as kind of an athlete, and unfortunately tore my hamstring in my second pro day. So I'm like, that's it. I'm going to go to Wall Street or work in finance. And luckily, I still had some teams that want to sign me as a free agent. I went to Cincinnati originally as an undrafted free agent, and that's when my path began. But I was always a grinder as a kid. I always had this growth mindset of like trying to get better at sports and school every day. And I think that really helped me on my path to where I am today.
Do you think, Chris, playing hockey, and I never played hockey, I watched it a lot, but did playing hockey help kind of with the toughness part of the game for you? I would imagine as a young person especially, because that sport would probably, you're forced a little bit to have some toughness in that sport.
Yeah. I always liked physical contact. I was a late bloomer as a kid. I went to high school. I was probably 5'5", 125 as a freshman. I graduated about 6'2", 220. I mean, I didn't mature until like realistically my junior year in high school. But I think playing all the sports, I mean, you probably talk about this all the time where parents get their kids focusing on one sport. I think I became a better athlete as a result of playing multiple sports. And I think for kids, from a social perspective as well, it's good for these kids to play multiple sports and use different skill sets and develop different parts of their body or athleticism in general. And so, yeah, I was always into sports but hockey, I loved hockey as a kid. I mean, that was my sport as a young kid, and traveling around and going to Canada and playing these select teams. And then it just, that's the path I took. I wanted to play football and baseball in college, and I ended up working out. I was a good baseball player as a kid and played a couple of years at Yale and got hurt my junior year, so decided to focus on football. But yeah, it was always part of my DNA.
Was there anybody, Chris, like when you were young, coach, maybe your father, parents, or someone in your community that kind of, dove in, spent time with you, or really kind of pushed you? Or there people along the way when you were younger maybe that kind of gave you some confidence, like, man, I might be able to be good at something. I could really get good at something. And was there anybody like that for you?
Yeah, my dad and my brother were really good influences on me. They never pushed me because I loved it. They didn't have to push me, excuse me. But like, I would say a pivotal point in my career and my confidence was high school. I had a coach at Avon called Kevin Driscoll, and he was my high school football coach. And he really believed in me, and really instilled that confidence in me and trust in me. I played different positions and always, gave me the ball in certain critical situations. And, that's important for a young athlete to have a coach that really believes in you, and more importantly, sees the value in you, and to develop confidence and to know that somebody really supports you and has a genuine interest in your success was really important to me.
Now that you're older, you've played for great coaches in the NFL, and you've been involved in business now, and you've done it. Does some of those lessons you learned, even from, I'm sure your dad, your brother, and him, but those lessons when you were younger of how somebody else, believed in you, somebody else gave you the confidence, do you see some of those now for yourself as you have a team of people now that in what you're doing now in your life? Do you see some of that carry over?
100%. I think, leadership is key in anything, right? If you're running a company or you're a legend coach like you, like being a great leader is so important. And I think really from a psychological perspective, Mark, really understanding what it takes to get the best out of each individual player or employee or, coworker is really important. I think developing a culture, and we talked about this at lunch, right? Developing a culture and empowering your team or your players to be great and instill confidence in them is really, really important. I think the things I learned from my athletic career about leadership and sacrifice and grit and just being passionate about growing every day and always trying to improve your football IQ and always taking care of your mental and physical wellness has been really important. And I think the lessons I learned in sports in general, but certainly in football, my time in the NFL, especially leadership. I mean, I hate to say this on air, but I wouldn't say I had the greatest leaders as head coaches in my 11 years in the NFL, but I learned a lot about what it takes to build a great culture and to empower a team to really be great.
Talk about the day, and I don't know if there was one day, or maybe you always felt like you would, but there was probably a day when either you got a letter in the mail or something that said you are admitted to Yale, which is one of the handful of the top universities in the country or even the world. Yale. My oldest son went to Stanford, play football, and I remember that one day there was a letter came and you were officially admitted. And that, I just remember that. Like for you, do you remember that? Was there a time for you like with Yale, because it's such a prestigious place, to be a part of that, and that's going to be a part of you forever?
Yeah, I remember the day like it was yesterday. I remember coming home from I don't remember if it was a practice or a game, but we were walking up the stairs from the basement, and my mom had decked out the hallway with like Yale banners and stuff. And my dad had been speaking to the coach, Carm Koza, who's a legendary coach at Yale. It was definitely one of the best days of my life. And for me to grow up playing Yale youth hockey, and again, my brother went to Princeton, and so just to have that dream become a reality was amazing. And I never took it for granted. I always had a chip on my shoulder there. Always tried to be a great student and a great teammate and a great athlete and a good representative of the organization or that school. But yeah, it was one of the funnest days of my life. And it's funny, man, when I first got in the league, I was almost hesitant about telling people I went to Yale, because I felt as though I wouldn't be treated as serious. I didn't go to Florida State or Miami or some of these other big schools. And then there was a turning point in my career where I became really proud of it, and I think that's after you're in the grind and you earn respect and you become a veteran, an established player. That was kind of a turning point in my time there, where I was like, I was proud to go to Yale, and I was proud of the education I got. And certainly towards the end of my career, I knew that, luckily I had a good education. I had skill sets I can fall back on, and that helped me.
Do you think there was a time too for you at Yale where, or was there ever a time where, you're watching and you're following, because you're in college football, and here's the Alabamas and Ohio States and Miamis and all these USCs and all these big schools, and not to diminish Yale because you guys played great football, but did you ever look and say, man, I can play there? Or how was that for you being at Yale, being a really good player at Yale?
Yeah.
With the landscape of everything going around in the country, where those schools get a ton of attention. They're getting all the attention all the time.
Yeah, I was always, and I'm saying this in a humble way, I was always blessed with natural athletic ability, but I worked so hard, man. Like as a kid, I was just always out there shooting pucks into the net, or shooting baskets in the dead end of the street I grew up in, and I was confident in myself athletically. Did I know that I can play at the next level? I'd be silly to say I knew that. But once I got in the league and I saw my peers around me, I'm like, I can hang. I could be a good player in this league, and I can play in this league for a while. But it's a completely different speed. I mean, playing at Alabama is much different than playing at Yale. I mean, there's I still talk to a lot of my teammates from Yale. There were some good football players, but the speed of the game and the game has become more sophisticated every year. But I always felt confident that I belonged, but I had a chip on my shoulder every day. I had to prove myself day in and day out that I belong there, and I could be a great asset to the team and help the team win.
Talk about being undrafted, because when you're undrafted, you got to climb a little bit steeper hill. You got to be a little bit better than the next guy, because if it's you and the guy they drafted and you're side by side, sometimes that guy is going to get the nod, and you basically have to beat them all out as an undrafted player. And you had an injury.
Yep.
Talk about that period of life for you and the kind of mentally what that was all about for you.
It was a hard road. I mean, I again, was a quarterback at a Yale, never really blocked anybody in my life, and became a fullback in the NFL, right? And so I'll never forget my rookie year. We were in training camp and we ran this one-on-one pass rushing drill, and I had to make a decision. And luckily I was smart enough to watch the drill. We were doing one-on-one pass rush. So it was running backs, and the quarterback would obviously hike the ball, and then you have linebackers and DNs, and they would come in and basically rush you. And so I watched the first 10 guys that went in the drill, and I'm like, all right, there's basically three options. They're either going to try to, make a move and go underneath you, they're going to try to make a move and go around you, or they're going to try to run your ass over. And so I'll never forget, there was a I can't remember his name, but he was a veteran DN that cut in line to get to me because he thought he was going to run my ass over. And I'm like, I'm either going to come out of my stance and try to get as low as possible and knock his ass to the ground, or he's going to embarrass me. And luckily he came out really high, and I caught him underneath the chin strap and got the best of him. But I figured out early in my career to I got to do what I got to do. I got to establish an identity as a tough guy. I would have played any position they asked me to play, and I had never played special teams in my life. And so, being an undrafted rookie free agent, you got to do what's necessary to make the team. And even throughout my career, I mean, every year I felt like they were trying to replace me with younger, cheaper guys. And so I had to prove that I belonged there, and I had to prove that I'd be a great asset to the team. And so, but yeah, always had a chip on my shoulder. It sounds cliche, Mark, but treated every film study like my job depended on it. Treated every rep in the weight room like my job depended on it, because it did.
Talk about, so you're a young guy from a small town in Connecticut, and then at some point, I made the team. The first team in the NFL. Yep. You played 11 years and you had a great career, but that first time, that had to just be unbelievable for you. Kind of going through your background and where you grew up and going to Yale, you're not drafted, and bang, you make the team. Talk about that a little bit.
Surreal. It was surreal. I remember, signing as a rookie free agent and, getting $10,000 to sign. The league minimum at the time in 1996 was $131,000. I was on the practice squad my first, I think 7 weeks of the season, making, I don't know, $3,300 a week. But I felt blessed. I was very grateful to be there. And now it's all right, how do I get on the active roster? And what happened was, week 8 of the season, my rookie year, Indianapolis' starting fullback got hurt. And so they picked me up off the practice squad from Cincinnati. And so my first week there, it was a nerve-wracking experience, obviously. And so I was like, shoot, I gotta make an impact immediately. And so the first assignment I had, the first game, I was only on kickoff return. And so I was the up back in kickoff return. So you have the returner, and I was part of the wedge that led for the returner. And I never forget, we were playing the Jets, and the Jets kicker shanked the ball, and it came right to me. So I'm like, my first play ever in the NFL, I get the ball. You got to be kidding me. So I broke one tackle. I never forget, I had green grass ahead of me. Next thing you know, I got blasted from the side. But that was kind of my entry to the NFL. And then I'll never forget, at halftime, I begged the special teams coach, Hank Kuhlman, who became a friend of mine, an ally of mine. I said, Hank, put me on kickoff. I will blow up the wedge, and I will not embarrass you. And next thing you know, he put me on the kickoff, opening kickoff, and I blew up the wedge, made the tackle, and that was it. I think the story is, starting from zero, be willing to earn your way and earn your spot on the team. And again, I would have played any position they would ask me to play. Long snapper, I would have played defense. I just had a chip on my shoulder every day I walked in that office and walked in that building, that practice facility. And, I think that's helped me in my career. I've had to start from zero many times. I think I've always had a massive fear of failure, Mark. And I think, people are going to fail, and especially in business and being an entrepreneur, people fail. The chips are stacked against you, just like it was in my time in the NFL. And so you got to learn from those failures. You got to learn from those lessons along the way. And I think, everything I've done in my career has put me in this position with this amazing brand, and to build a really special team and surround ourselves with really special investors and partners. And we got a really good opportunity to make an impact in culture and sports and fandom in general. And so it's been fun. I think having a growth mindset my whole life has really, brought me to this opportunity, and I don't take it for granted.
Do you ever, or could you, if there's a young person that, sometimes young people in sports, they're kind of at the top of the pile. They're the highly rated guy. I'm the number one guy in the country. I'm a McDonald All-American in basketball, that guy. Then there are other guys, which there's a lot more of these other guys that, probably a little bit like yourself. The odds are against you. You're not the guy that, everybody's talking about in the press conference, but you're trying to make the team. And I know you got young kids now, but, to that guy or girl that's kind of in that boat, maybe they're trying to get into the pro sports or even make a college team. Maybe they're not the most heralded guy. What would you tell that person?
It's an interesting question. I mean, when I was young, I joke with my wife and my kids about this. I think my athletic career peaked about 12. I mean, I was a really good athlete as a kid, luckily. I'm saying that in a humble way, but I was always the first pick in the draft and first kid picked in Little League and midget football at Pop Warner. And then as time went on, I feel like people kind of caught up to me. And look, you have to grind. You have to put in the work. And some young athletes are really blessed athletically, and you see these stories where they don't, live up to their potential. And you see other people like a Tom Brady who, became one of the best players in NFL history because he put in the time and put in the work, and he studied film like his job depended on it. And he knew what everybody was doing on the field at all times. And so, I had an interesting call with a guy named Sam Young earlier. Sam played in the NFL as an offensive lineman, similar to me, six teams, 11 years. And now he's kind of starting from zero, embarking on his new chapter in life and his new career. And we had a really good conversation. I said, look, man, you got to be willing to start from zero. And, we talked about this thing at lunch. The transition from being a professional athlete to the real world is very, very difficult. And so finding that next passion, finding that next identity, taking the lessons you learn from sports and the business of sports and carrying those into your next chapter is invaluable. And so for young kids, and I try to mentor as many young athletes as I can, it's like, look, there's so much great access to information out there, and there's so much stuff to learn, both on the intellectual side of sports as well as the physical side of sports. And you got to grind. You got to put in the work. And I don't care how blessed you are athletically, like you have to work hard. When you go to the NFL, or you saw this in the NBA or even in college, everybody's the man when you go to the NFL. Everybody was a star of their college team. And so what separates the good players from the great players is they always try to get better every day. And that's been the message I try to articulate to these young athletes. Like, you got to put in the work, man. You got to treat it like it's, your job depends on it, because it does, or your career depends on it, or your athletic scholarship depends on it, because it does.
Mm-hmm. When you got hurt, Chris, and you're kind of that aspiring young guy, and you dealt with some injuries, pretty tough ones. Were there ever times where, because it happens to all of us, we get a setback in life, whatever that might be. It could be an injury, it could be, losing your job. It's part of life. There are setbacks. But was there any times where kind of that setback, you kind of had a day or two where there's a little bit of your, why me? And you're kind of feeling sorry. Then you pick yourself back up, or for you, was it just right away? Like, setbacks happen, and some people deal with them differently, but you got to overcome them. So for you, you've had to do that. You've had to overcome a lot of setbacks in your career.
Yeah. The game has changed. I mean, when I played, there was no concussion protocol, and I played hurt all the time. Like, I was hurt all the time. Like, you're never 100% healthy in the NFL. I mean, I never forget when I was in Carolina, I think it was my second year in Carolina, I tore my plantar fascia, and the trainers were like, and the doctor was like, "You're done for the year." I'm like, "I'm not done for the year." Like, shoot up my foot. I'll play in a dead foot. I played 8 weeks. I would cast it on a Wednesday to Saturday, took the cast off, did walkthrough, and then shot it up for the game and played, on Sunday. And, I look back, am I proud of that? Would I do it again? Probably, because that's all I knew, and I think playing hurt is you got to be mentally tough in professional sports. And, again, I think they're protecting the players a lot better, especially related to concussions. But, if you're hurt and you can't go out there on Sundays, they're going to find somebody who can. And so for me, it was important to be accountable to my teammates. It was important for me to be accountable to the coaches and the organization. And I was hurt a lot more days than I was 100% healthy. I know that for sure.
We talked about this a little bit the other day, but, you end up in Indianapolis, and, my cousin, Jim Harbaugh, our dads, and Jim's dad, my dad, we all go back, same little bitty town in Ohio. But you had those few years with Jim, and now he's the head coach, and he's won everywhere he's been. He's done a great job. He figures it out, and he's got a great football mind in that regard. But talk about Jim as your teammate. Like, when you watched him, got to know him, you're watching him play. What kind of stood out to you? Like, what was that like with him, with you and Jim?
Jim, undoubtedly the most competitive human being I've ever been around in my life. Whether it was us playing golf on an off day, or playing cards in a plane, or, in a football game in the playoffs in 1996 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, when he cut through his lip and he's bleeding profusely in the huddle. Jim was a warrior, man. Like, I really, really loved my time with Jim Harbaugh, and it's been fun watching his coaching career. And obviously he comes from a football family, right? His dad is a great coach, and his brother obviously is a great coach. But the thing that really sticks out to me is Jim is the most competitive human being I've ever been around. And I think that's really helped him in his career, right? And he's really earned the respect he's won at every organization or every team he's been a part of. And I think he's done a good job of really getting guys to play for him and being real. And I think, we talked about this story the other day, right? Like, I had coaches that played D3 cornerback, and now all of a sudden they're coaching me as a running back coach in the NFL. It's a little different. I think Jim really knows how to set a culture. And I think Jim's, combination of like an old school and a new school coach where, at least from what I hear and what I know, like, his guys grind. They practice hard. They're physical during practice, but he's a competitive dude, man. I think that's really helped his career, both on the field and in the coaching realm as well.
His dad was my godparent growing up, Jack. But we were in the 9th grade, and it was Christmas time. We were about 14 years old, and we went to this little gym in Ohio, and we were going to play some pickup basketball. And John, his brother John, played, and we had rounded up some people from the little town. We're all going to get together and play. And Jim and I still laugh about it because he and I about went to blows.
Yeah.
It was about ready to fight, because he was being physical. It's like, dude, man, we're just playing a pickup basketball game. But he was there to try to prove a point. And he likes to think he held his own. I told him I ended his basketball career and he started his football career. But he's always been that way. And then John obviously is much different. But how about some of the other guys that, teammates you've had or coaches you've had that maybe stood out for different reasons for you throughout that 11-year period and why they might have stood out?
I played with a lot of great players. I played with a lot of Hall of Fame players, and I was smart enough to learn early in my career to learn from those guys, whether it be, Marshall Faulk or Jim Harbaugh. And I remember one good story about Jim Harbaugh. We're playing golf one day on an off day. It was a Tuesday, and he was buried in this trap. And I'm like, he's done. We're betting a little bit. And he hit this miraculous shot. And next thing you know, he's like running down the fairway. That's why they call me Captain Comeback, baby. And it's just like, that was Jim Harbaugh, man, in a nutshell. I played with Reggie White, who was a great man and a great teammate. Jerry Rice, who just had an incredible work ethic. Kurt Warner was a phenomenal player and a phenomenal human being. Kevin Green. Man, I played with so many great players, and I was smart enough and humble enough to watch them and see how they grind in the weight room and see how they grind in the film study room and how they take care of their body and how they take care of their football IQ and how they treat people. Some good, some bad, right? Like I played with guys that didn't have the best etiquette at times when you go out to dinner with them and how they're treating waitresses or waiters. But I was humble enough early in my career to kind of assess the room and watch these guys firsthand and what made them great and what made Jerry Rice the greatest receiver of all time. Marshall Faulk, probably the smartest football player I've ever played with in my life. The guy was like a coach on the field. Obviously an incredible athlete and changed the game, the running back position, or, scat back going out for Pat. Marshall could have played receiver. He probably could have played defensive back. But I think, Mark, I played with a lot of great players, and I learned so much from those players and what it takes to be a good professional, both on and off the field, and that was really helpful.
When you look back at some of those guys, and you've been around some of the greatest of all time, really, some of the best who it's ever played, and I've been in basketball a little bit similar, but in your mind, what do you think kind of separates some of those guys out? Now, talent is one thing. You got to have some talent. You got to be good and fast and quick. There's some things but there's always those intangible things. You mentioned Tom Brady earlier, but in your mind, what separates those guys and then pushes them to another level where they are in that upper echelon?
Confidence. For me, it's confidence. I see these guys and how confident they are in their abilities and how hard they work. But if you don't have confidence as a young athlete or even a professional athlete, it's very difficult. I just saw the way they carried themselves in the huddle, the way they carried themselves in their kind of swag on the field and the games. But for me, it was just all confidence with these guys. They, like I said, you've seen this in basketball and I saw it in football for many years. There's so many genetically gifted players in that locker room, but the players that become great just have this innate self-confidence. And then it's, whether it's your young athlete or even the NFL, I saw the way Mike Martz would treat Kurt Warner and treat Marshall Faulk and Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt. He had so much confidence in those guys that, and again, he has to put them in the position to succeed and call plays and stuff, but confidence is crucial. And it's important as a leader to instill confidence in your players. And I think for me, that's what I try to do in my business career. I try to have great communication with my employees or my partners and my teammates and give them the confidence to, come up with creative ideas or give them the confidence to be great and think big, right? And have big ideas and want to go big with this business. And so, yeah, if I had to nail it down to one word, it's confidence.
Interesting. So you had 11 years, and for all of us at some point as athletes, you grew up your whole life playing, and you were fortunate you played at the highest level, and you survived for a good long time. That's a long time, by the way, 11 years in the NFL. getting beat up and banged around like you guys do. But then there's a point where you kind of in your mind say, I think it's done, and how hard was that for you? Or was it hard for you?
It's hard for everybody. I mean, the transition from being a pro athlete or ending your career, like you dream about this when you're a little kid, right? And then all of a sudden you're there and you're on that stage and you do everything you can to stay there, right? And physically and mentally and try to train in the off season and just do the right thing all the time. I was lucky enough again to learn from the older guys that this game does not last forever.
Mm-hmm.
The average career in the NFL is 3 years, and that's for a reason. And so I was lucky enough to play 11 years, but I knew the game wasn't going to last forever. And so I always kind of prepared myself mentally for that. Luckily I had a good education to fall back on and did some internships in the off season and started to think about my life after football. But the transition, like I said, is very difficult. I think for me, I was very blessed and lucky to find my next locker room, so to speak, and I joined this hedge fund in 2008. It was run by a gentleman named Michael Lurch. I played football against him in college, and he hired a lot of ex-Ivy League athletes that were work hard, play hard. And I felt like, again, it was my next locker room. And I just, the culture was super dialed in and I loved it. And, I had some opportunities to go on Wall Street and join these bulge bracket banks. And I was 34 at the time and would join a 2-year training program with 22, 23-year-old kids. And it wasn't my vibe. And so I think for me, it was learning from the older guys, having the realization and the reality that this game is not going to last forever. And when my name wasn't called again, I was okay with it. Still sucks. Like I tried to play a 12th year and try to work out a deal with, I think Denver was the team I was trying to go to, but I just felt very lucky and blessed that I was able to play for that long. And luckily I was kind of in one piece and, physically and I wanted to use my brain in other ways and do other things in my life and build a legacy in other ways for sure.
Do you feel like, Chris, because you mentioned I loved how you said it, you're trying to find that next locker room. I think so many guys, and I've had a lot of friends that played, especially in basketball, they've played a long time, and then the ball stops bouncing, and they know it, and it's time for one reason or another. And maybe they keep trying for a little bit, but then there comes a point where it's done. And I felt like there's so many athletes that I know in my life that were really good and had success, but they struggled to make that transition. There was almost like they couldn't find that next locker room. They all of a sudden they had all this free time, and they used to walk in a restaurant and everybody knew them, and they had an identity that was built around who they were as players, which what they accomplished was amazing.
Yep.
But then it stops. And a lot of people that don't play sports maybe they can't really understand that. But there are guys that really struggle to kind of find their footing, after sports.
Yep.
Did you see that sometimes with some other people as well? I've had friends, I love them to death and I feel for them, but they're still hunting for that next
Yep.
roar of the crowd. I got to hear it one more time, somehow run out there with a uniform on.
Yep.
But it's not going to happen. It's done.
I see it all the time. I mean, the reality is you just cannot replace that feeling. The feeling of walking out in a tunnel or jogging out in a tunnel to, 60 to 80,000 fans and millions of people watching. You can't replace that feeling in a boardroom or in any normal job. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to move on. And so, whether it's, to your point, people recognizing you or getting the attention you once got or getting the overall credibility, it's just like, that's the reality. And some guys, obviously the big name guys still get it and people recognize them and all that stuff. But I think, like I said earlier, Mark, starting from zero, you have to be okay with that, and you have to live out this next dream. But more importantly, figure out what that next dream is and what you're passionate about or how you want your legacy to play out. And I see guys struggling with it every day. And so in summary, it's you're not going to replace that feeling that you get of being in a huddle of an NFL game or running out into the tunnel of an NFL game, but finding out what your next, passion is and taking all those traits and those lessons you learned from your time in the NFL and having those translate into your next career is critical. And I think a lot of athletes struggle. I think they either trust the wrong people or don't surround themselves with the right people, and just don't go about the process in a very humble and realistic way. And but on the other side, I've seen some friends of mine that have done really, really well, and I couldn't be any more proud of those guys, that they had, they had the awareness to understand that they have to work at it, and they have to start from zero, and they have to build up their next career, and figure out what they're passionate about and go after it in a big way. Like, you got to take risk. You got to take the bat off the shoulder. And if you don't, you're going to have a lot of regret in your life.
How difficult was it for you? And I have to say this correctly, but as a former NFL player, or I've coached for years, and there's other people. There are times when you go to that next venture in life, you kind of have to check your ego at the door a little bit, because you're not playing football right now.
Yeah.
I'm not coaching or whatever it may be. You got to kind of check it. Some guys, I think, struggle with that. They struggle with that. They still want to feel like they still have the jersey on.
Yeah.
And the reality is you don't.
Yep.
And it was a great period of life. It's amazing, and accomplishments, and you've had them.
Yep.
But then there is a next chapter. And so the next chapter comes, I got to kind of put that one over there and be humble enough to say, okay, I got to go learn this. I really have to learn this next venture, whatever it may be, because this one is done.
It's a very humbling process. I think, again, people struggle with it, but I think having the awareness to realize and be grateful for the time you had. Like, I'm just so grateful for the 11 years I had in the NFL, and the people I met, and the experiences I had. And again, I that was a time in my life, but I got many more chapters in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I have the new chapter of this Fathead opportunity. I have the chapter of being a dad of 2 young boys, and being married to a great woman. And so it's being at peace with that chapter being over is never easy. But once you're grateful for that time and understand that was just a chapter in my life, that's not my whole identity. That's just one chapter in my life. And I'm going to move on to this next chapter and dive in as much or more than I dove into my athletic career is crucial, in my opinion.
One last kind of thought on that, and then we're going to move on to the next one. But, I'm 61 years old, and there are times that I will have a dream that I'm playing a basketball game. And the dream, I literally, it's like the whole game. Like, I'm up the floor. I remember a play. I'm running back on defense. My dream might last 20 seconds, but when I wake up, I feel like I played the entire game in my dream, and I'm in my 60s.
Yeah.
I could imagine probably there are times you wake up like, did I play yesterday?
Yeah.
Did I have a game? Because you're so used to it. Your body and your mind are so used to one thing, and you're in that rhythm for so long.
Yeah.
And then when you get out of it, it doesn't go away like that. It just doesn't.
Yeah, I think for me, it was finding out the next rhythm, to your point, right? I still train like I'm a professional athlete. I wake up at 4:30, I'm in the cold plunge, I'm in the sauna, I'm meditating, I still work out heavy, I squat heavy, because I feel like that's what I need to do to be able to perform my best, whether that's as an entrepreneur or a CEO or as a dad or a husband. Like, I need to feel good physically. Of course, I'm vain a little bit, and I need to, work out for those reasons, but like, preparing myself mentally and physically those are the things I need to do to get myself dialed in and be able to perform at my best. And I think you brought up a point earlier, which is a very valid point. Like, once you're done in the NFL or in professional sports, nobody's telling you to wake up early and work out. Nobody's telling you what time meetings are. So your schedule is fluid. And so you have to develop this kind of structure in your life and schedule things out in a big way and make it a priority, right? And I see even friends from Yale or friends from the NFL like, oh, I don't have time to work out. You have time to work out. You make time to work out. You have to eat healthy because it's important, and I try to teach my kids that, and I try to lead by example, but it's hard sometimes. You want the kids to be kids, but I know nutrition very well. I know it's good for you, and I try to steer them in the right direction, but at the same time, I want my kids to be kids, and my wife and I have a pretty good plan around that. But yeah, I think it's just figuring out what your next thing is important, and taking those lessons you learn and instilling those on an everyday basis is crucial.
So currently, right now, and I've enjoyed kind of even digging deeper and reading about it, but my children, years ago were they were excited about this company called Fathead. You're now the CEO. And, for those people that don't know, years ago, it was that big headshot that was about 2 feet tall or bigger than that. And it stuck on your wall in your bedroom, and kids had them, and, their favorite athletes up there and all that. And so that's what you're currently diving. But from the time you stopped playing till now, talk about some of the stops along the way, and how did I get from, playing, I think the last year was maybe San Francisco,
Yep.
49ers, from playing to later in life, here we are as the CEO of a company that I think it's going to blow up, and you're going to recreate it in an amazing way. But
Yeah.
now you're the CEO of Fathead. Take me from there to now.
I retired in 2006 and unfortunately made fullback money and not quarterback money. So I had to go to work for a living. And so I took the executive programs at Harvard and Wharton. I joined a hedge fund in 2008, which was a crazy time, 2008, right? And I had no experience. I didn't know what an option was. The next thing you know, I'm trading options live in 2 weeks. And so I joined this hedge fund, and I had a bunch of different roles there in my 11 years there. I was a trader. I told you the story how we inherited a professional basketball team, and I was the president and CEO of the basketball team. Came back, helped launched a co-invest fund underneath the hedge fund umbrella, worked through that strategy for several years, and then got more involved in the private equity venture capital side of a business. So I had a couple of CEO roles of companies we invested in. Went the entrepreneur route about 5 years ago, started a brand in the health and wellness space, and then was in the right place at the right time to have the opportunity to put a group together to buy Fathead at the end of 2023. And again, I felt like my career has kind of been all over the place. I think, one of the key points in that story is I had a guy in Mike Lurch that really believed in me and knew that if I was going to send anybody to Tokyo to run a basketball team, Chris Hetherington would say yes, and he would do it 100 miles an hour. Or if I was going to send somebody to raise money and be the CEO of a health and wellness company in Denver, Hetherington will go after it full speed. And so I felt very lucky that I had this guy that really believed in me, but I earned that, I think. And I worked my ass off and worked twice as hard as the next guy. And I feel very grateful, Mark, to be in this position where I love sports. I'm in a position where I can leverage these relationships I built over the last 25 years. And in reality, I feel like for the first time in my business career, we're starting on third base. We have this incredible, iconic brand. We have incredible brand awareness and brand equity. We have 2 million email subscribers, over 300,000 SMS subscribers. Now it's all about getting the right team in place, having the right strategy, and being super focused. And I think we have a real opportunity to make a big impact in culture. We're known, as you said, for our life-size vinyl decals, and we have minis. When I bought the business, we had over 55,000 SKUs on the website. And so we've spent the last year plus really cleaning up the business and laying the foundation for growth. And it was a little bit of a blessing and a curse. I mean, we had a significant cleanup process. So I'm really proud of my team and the dedication they've put forth to really understand what it takes to build a successful business, and starting to surround ourselves with some really smart partners and investors. And but yeah, I think my career's kind of been all over the place, but I truly believe that everything I've done and all the lessons I've learned and some of the failures I've had have put me in this position to be a part of this iconic brand. And we got big plans for the future. We have big growth plans. We're starting to expand distribution. We bought a technology company very early on. The goal eventually is to build this fan engagement platform where you're kind of combining the physical with the digital. But there's so much low-hanging fruit to this business to, improve the license partnerships we have. We have a custom side of the business, which is about 34% of our business today. That's Fatted Yourself, or my 10-year-old wins Little League championship, wants to capture that moment, birthdays, graduations. We sell a lot of pets. So it's an incredible business, but business is hard, man. You got to wake up every day and want to be better. You got to wake up every day as a leader and try to empower your team and your staff to do great things and have great ideas. And I feel very, very fortunate to be in this position.
So would you compare, so first of all, when you're buying a business, you're buying Fathead, you're looking at it and you're evaluating it and you're kind of seeing the potential, but you're also seeing where the previous group, and not to be critical of anybody else, but where maybe they have missed, they may have missed the mark. A little bit similar, in coaching. I get hired to, be the head coach at Alabama, and they haven't been in the NCAA basketball tournament in 8 years and 10 years. And, they're averaging 3,000 fans a game in a 15,000 seat arena. And it's the potential is there, but it's just not being, met to that level.
Yep.
And so you evaluate it. And then when you come in, like you guys did, you're coming in and now it's new ownership. And some of the things that you wanted to instill right off the bat, like, obviously your culture, your plan, your vision, all those type things, probably very similar, if you're taking over an athletic program.
Yep.
But for you, what were some of those? Like, okay, we've got to establish these things. What would they have been for you?
It's interesting. And I tell this story all the time. We were doing diligence on the business. We were like, this is almost too good to be true. We have at the time, a 17-year-old iconic brand, again, with incredible brand awareness and brand equity. The brand was everywhere back in the day, right? Super Bowl commercials, TV commercials, all over ESPN, and all these athlete ambassadors. In today's world, it's different, right? It's about social and social selling and live selling and affiliate partnerships and influencer partnerships. But we looked at the business, my partners and I were like, shoot, is this a melting ice cube or a sleeping giant? And the more we dug in, the more we realized with the right operators and the right relationships in sports and entertainment culture and the right vision and the right plan and the right focus, this thing could be massive. And so, again, we've spent a considerable amount of time cleaning up the business. And now it's all about, we have so many opportunities. We have so many relationships and we have a great brand. So a lot of people want to partner with us, but it's staying focused on what your low hanging fruit is and what your short-term priorities. And then it's like, all right, who do we want to be when we grow up as a company and as a brand? And so I think the key for us is our mantra around Fathead is either hell yes or not yet, right? And we have all these opportunities and we expand into new categories and get new licenses and go global and build a fan engagement platform. And those things will happen in time when we're ready. And for us, it's the biggest thing is staying focused and waking up every day and knowing what our core focus is and what our core KPIs are on an everyday basis and making sure everybody understands that inside and out, whether it's new people we hire. We just hired an incredible CMO, Jared Doobie, who's been with Nike and Samsung and CAA and ESPN. And so from the first day he gets there, is like, look, this is our brand vision. This is our brand voice. These are our core priorities. These are our short-term priorities. There's going to be shiny objects that come about every day because we have great relationships and we have a great brand. But like, here's what we need to do to be successful in the short term. And here's what we're building toward. And everybody's got to stick to that every day.
Were there coaches along the way that you played for potentially, college, high school, or in the NFL? I think you played for 6 different franchises. Were there coaches where you learned some tools that you may now, as a CEO, you go back and sometimes you learn what not to do, like how I don't want to do it. We've had that. I've had coaches that were spectacular, and I've had some where I said, they're good, but I'm not doing it that way. That wasn't helpful. It wasn't good. So were there some guys along the way for you, or lessons maybe you learned along the way that you're now seeing that are translating into that for you as in the role that you're in now?
To be honest with you, I think I've learned more lessons in my professional career after football, especially about leadership. Again, I loved every coach I had and I respected every coach I had. I wouldn't say they were the greatest leaders in the world. And like we said earlier, understand from a psychological standpoint how to treat people and how to get the best out of every player. I think a pivotal time in my career was to be open to having mentors in my life. I think I've learned specifically in the last 5 or 6 years from either communities that I've joined. There's a community called the Outlier Project, and the gentleman that started that grew up pretty close to me in Connecticut, Scott McGregor. I've learned so much from Scott McGregor on how to treat people and how to reach out to people when you don't have to tell them you appreciate them, or reach out to your family and tell them you love them, or send a thank you note just cause, or um, again, how to be a great leader. I think in my professional career in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been really good lessons from mentors that I've had and communities that I've joined. And look, it's hard to ask for help. It's I played 11 years in the NFL. I got this good background. Like, I need coaching or as much or more than anybody, right? Especially when you're embarking on a new business, or you're entering a new category, or doing new things in your life. Like, everybody needs coaching and everybody needs mentorship. And so I think having the foundation for my brother and my father, I can call them at any time when I'm having a hard day, or I'm, trying to make a decision, or, going through some stuff at home or whatever. So having that foundation is key. But look, I've always had this massive fear of failure. I think another pivotal time is being okay with failure, and treating failure like a lesson. Like, look, I don't like to fail. I still don't like to fail. And I don't hopefully plan on ever failing again. But like, failure is a reality in business sometimes, especially as a startup. We know the stats of a startup. Most fail. So I think in general, for me, it's seeking help. It's getting advice from people that have had these reps before, that have been through the battle that I'm going through, or been in the trenches that I'm in right now. And then for me, it's trying to learn those things and instill those things in my team. And it's cliche, but having a good culture and within your organization is critical, whether it's professional sports or in business. Having the right culture and empowering your teammates to do great things. And then for me too, like, the lessons I've learned, I try to instill that in my kids. Like, I try to teach my kids the stuff that I never was taught as a kid. Like, nobody taught me how to become a leader when I was 10 years old. And when the message to my son Jack is like, look, you don't have to be a vocal leader. You lead by example, and you can control your effort and your attitude and your energy, and be a great teammate, and pick your teammates up when they make an error, or they miss a basket, or congratulate them when they make a great play, or they hit a home run and stuff. So I think my confidence in this process has evolved over the last several years, and I think we're in a really good spot as an organization. I think we're putting the right people in the right seats, and as you know, man, it's all about team, and it's about strategy, and then finally it's about focus, especially for a brand like Fathead. We got to be focused every day.
Mm-hmm. How about this one, Chris? You're the head coach. You're the head coach. You're the GM. You're kind of all. You got it all. You wear all the hats. And when you hire people, and you're trying to, especially for key positions, well, all positions, but really with key positions, what are you looking for? Like, somebody's coming up, and it may not even be with Fathead. It may be in a whole nother world out there, and they're listening and watching this podcast, and you know, they're trying to get hired. Like, for you, what separates? Because at the end of the day, it was like me. I have to hire an assistant coach, and I'm evaluating these 3 or 4 or 5 people here, and I'm trying to figure this thing out. But for you, what are the characteristics that push somebody over the edge, that you say, you know what, I want you on my team?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about this, Mark. I think the saying that sticks out in my mind is from Mark Cuban. He says, hire slow and fire fast. I think hiring the right people, especially for a brand like Fathead, is critical. And the things I look for, obviously experience and expertise is a no-brainer, but like, you have to fit into the culture, and you have to have the values. And look, I tell team this all the time. You don't have to want to go out and drink beers with somebody after work, but you have to have good communication. You got to respect each other. You got to have each other's back all the time. You got to have constructive feedback when necessary. But the things I look for is you got to fit culturally into the organization. I always like hiring very good people that have great values and have incredible work ethic and specific skill sets, and you find a role for them, but at the end of the day, it's just critical. I mean, you look at the major functions of a business, right? Sales and marketing and operations and business development. For an organization like Fathead, licensing is a big part of our component to our business. It's important to have the right people in the right seats, and it's it's important to empower people to always grow in their career too. Like, look, if nothing would make me happy, it would be a huge bummer, obviously. But if a young kid that was part of my team got this amazing opportunity to progress his career and go on to something, really great beyond Fathead, I would love that. But in the time that we have him here or her here, like we're going to get the most out of them. They're going to add the most value. So people got to wear multiple hats. And especially for a brand like Fathead, where we're growing our head count and, obviously we have these big plans, but like you got to be willing to wear multiple hats. And some people either don't want to do that or they don't have the capacity to do it. And so I think that's important for me too when I'm hiring people. Like, you're going to have to wear multiple hats. We don't have a huge staff. We got 10 full-time employees and we got a bunch of consultants and agencies and stuff like that. But it's important for you to be okay with wearing multiple hats and being accountable and being a great teammate and always looking to grow and learn. And at the end of the day, I break it down in the sports terms, right? Like, here's our playbook, right? Everybody has to know that playbook inside and out. And just because you're a fullback on a team or you're the head of marketing, you have to know what everybody's doing on the field. You have to know what everybody's doing in the organization. And more importantly, you have to know what the core mission of the playbook is, and that is to win. And it's not only win on the football field, but you got to win in business. You got to grow revenue. You got to grow intentionally and profitably. You got to grow in an intelligent manner. And so I think for me, in a nutshell, it's hiring the right people is so important and putting the people in the right seats. And you hear these terms, right? Like wrong seat, right person, or right person, wrong seat. It's very true. I just listened to this community that I just joined called Athletes Touch, and they had a gentleman who was played in the NHL for 11 years and won a Stanley Cup for the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. And he went through this whole process, man. It just made so much sense on, the grading system they go through and what are those components of the grading system? It's, does he get it, right? Does he get the vision? Does he understand his role and his responsibility? I felt like some coaches in my career, Mark, like they never were very transparent about like, hey, Hetherington, here's what we're expecting out of you. You may be a backup fullback now, but like we would love for you to become a starting fullback, or your role is to become the best special teams player you can possibly be. I felt like communication is key within an organization. And so try to instill that on an everyday basis, like always communicating what people's roles and responsibilities. They got to be comfortable with that role. But at the same time, like, you want them to be great. Like, you're not going to be an executive assistant forever, I hope. Like, your job you should wake up every day and think, how can I progress my career? And my job is to make sure that happens. Yeah.
Well, I tell you, it's amazing just getting to know you. And I just kind of sit here and I just have very little doubt that you're going to get this thing rolling to where it's phenomenal. And because of who you are and how you're going to put it together and what your values are. So I don't think there's any doubt. In short order here, we're going to see Fathead as kind of a reawakening of a brand that people are aware of, but in a whole new way, in a whole new level, and a whole new level of success. So
I appreciate that.
I wish the best for you, man. I'm rooting for you, pulling for you. And I've had a ball, man. I've had a ball having you on my show, and look forward to getting to know you even better.
Thank you, Coach. Really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.